All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for hosting me. Yeah, it was great to start actually with touring the facility and meeting some of the folks here, getting a first-hand impression. I have some slides. I'm not in love with them, so I'll try to go really quickly just to give you context about who we are, what we do, share with you a little bit of our experience in Israel, but really save as much time as possible for Q&A and making it a dialogue as such. This needs to work, of course. It does. Okay, so for those of you less familiar with the Israeli ecosystem, really I think when it comes to innovation, it's widely acknowledged that we managed to build an Israeli innovation hub and most importantly, innovation ecosystem, which is basically on the medal podium of the world. By the way, it's the only sports in which we have as high as achievements, unfortunately. So really when you talk about R&D spending as a percentage of GDP, Israel is a leading country. We have excellent academic science. We have very sophisticated and vibrant financing market, angel, venture capitals, and so on. Of course, amazing entrepreneurs and industries, 300 multinational companies who chose Israel as one of their R&D centers, sometimes their only R&D centers, and also supporting government, and I'll talk about that, this being my current role. So, as I've said, again, we'll go very quickly here, but this is just, the 2015 numbers are actually much, much higher. Over 100 M&A transaction deals, as I said, typically with many, many IPOs, mostly NASDAQ, by the way. That's the market of choice for Israeli companies. Mobileye being one example you might have heard about, raising $1 billion last year, and many others. And I'm mentioning that because when I talked about the multinational, and a phenomenon which is unique to Israel is the fact that most of these companies came or grew in Israel through acquisition of Israeli startups. That's a typical way of getting into Israel or growing there. And I must say that the importance of those companies to the Israeli economy has been substantial, but also the importance of the Israeli technology to those companies has been strategic. We can take Intel as an example. Over 10,000 people on the ground in Israel working, doing both design and manufacturing, certainly strategic to Israel. But over 50% of Intel's revenues are actually made in Israel. So most of the processors that all of us have been using, actually for many decades right now, have Israeli roots inside. And this is just one example. We can mention HP and Apple and Google and Facebook and General Motors and Johnson & Johnson and Coca-Cola. So it goes beyond different sectors as such. This is to say that for Israel, high-tech is strategic. 50% of our export is high-tech. So there's no need to explain, I can tell you, to any prime minister or president how important and strategic this sector is. They're always caring, knowledgeable about the health of the high-tech sector. It's something, of course, which wasn't the case 4 decades ago, and I'll talk about history in a minute. But today, regardless of which government rules in Israel, there's always support for the agenda of science, technology, and innovation. Now, this shift to a knowledge economy is something that really characterizes Israel. It involves some magic, and you're all participants in the ecosystem, so you know what I talk about. The translating ideas or intellectual property to things that impact economies and societies is something that is truly magical. And the point I want to make here, and I'll go to government in a minute, it's something that government cannot do. It's something that we cannot do, I would claim also shouldn't do. But it's certainly something which is a classical private role sector. So what does government need to do? Well, it starts by understanding, in my mind, of course. You see, my team didn't protect me. I had to start with my disclaimers, and I didn't. So I'll do them now very quickly, okay? Forgive me. So I am from Israel, as you probably noticed, which means I will speak in strong, opinionated statements. Please don't accept those as this is the way to go, and this is just work for us, okay? I'm just sharing that with you, and of course it's also a good time for the other disclaimer, which is important, which is add to anything I say in your minds the words relative to a government. So I'll say we're flexible and dynamic, and you will all think relative to a government, okay, and so on. And now we can continue. I really think this part of the government has worked very effectively a public-private partnership, understanding that it's not about, what's your religion, is it market-driven or state-driven, what's your thought about picking winners and so on. It's not about that. It's about working together very effectively, with the most important principle is each one focusing on what they do best. So for example, we don't think we can forecast better than you all of you, what's the next big thing? Therefore, if you ask me, I'll save you one question. What are your strategic sectors and how do you allocate your budget to your sectors? We don't work that way at all. It's a very bottom-up systems. Okay, we think the best ideas should come from the different participants in the market, and we don't know what those are. We also don't think we're better than you guys in building companies, mentoring companies, and taking them to the next level. That's not what we do. Even though I spent a few years in industry and in venture capital. However, there are some things which government does best or is the only player in town. I won't mention all of them, but very quickly, infrastructure, I think that's easy to understand. But let's just calibrate what it means. It means human capital. It means R&D infrastructure. It means tax environment. It means IP regime. It means everything that creates the arena and environment which lets every entrepreneur, researcher, innovator to dream a dream and then fulfill it, okay, to implement his or her full potential. The only entity which can do that is infrastructure, either because you cannot change the tax rules, I'm sure you would like to do that, or because it's not financially viable. It doesn't make sense for a single firm to invest in an infrastructure, whereas from my perspective, serving thousands of companies, it does. So again, very quickly, a few examples. I have dozens truly, but we helped build a national biobank for the benefit of companies in developing cancer therapy or researchers that need human tissues as part of what they do, for a fee, by the way. Okay, they pay for that, but that's something we helped build. We helped build 6 nanotechnology R&D centers. We created something nicknamed in Israel the Angel's Law, which gives tax benefits to angel investors in early stage companies. Very aggressive, actually, tax benefits. Aggressive being a good word in Israel. So you can actually recognize 100% of your investment against any income at the year of the investment, which basically means you get 50% immediately of your investment. And the only other type of expense getting that is charitable donations. So it really reflects, I think, and trust me, the tax authority does not like to, but really I think we managed to convince them about that. And a list goes on and on. But the most important part, really, the number one thing I want you to remember from this part of the presentation is the part about risk sharing, okay? Both words are important. Risk sharing. Let's start with the risk. Very disappointing, I'm sure, to all of you. R&D is extremely risky, and most project fails. That's life. Can't handle it? Choose another profession. That's how it works. It's highly risky. That's easy to understand. What's less easy to understand typically is the fact that we strongly believe that government has a much better ability to handle risk than the private sector. That's a little bit counterintuitive. Taxpayer money, high risk, somewhat doesn't sound right, but it does when you think about it. And there's this great reasoning in taking that approach because. And I'll try to explain it through a very simplistic example. You will excuse me for that, but trust me, it scales. If I invest in Peter's company, congratulations for that, by the way, but it fails, at least fail quickly, right? That's important. But let's add one more thing, that out of his failing company emerged 4 new startups based on the know-how, the IP, the lessons learned even, the talent. As a venture capitalist, I still hate him. I lost all my money. That was a very bad investment. As a government, investing in his failing company was an amazing investment. It was very successful. It actually yielded very positive economic impact. So it's not as if we're promoting failures, but we're definitely embracing them. And my return function as a government official is totally different than the one of the venture capitalist, which means I can take more risk. I will benefit also from what the private sector will define as failing companies. Okay, this is exactly what we do. And when a project is presented in our committee as a risky project, we get excited. This is where we should be. Okay, and what you see, let me say it right now, I won't save it for that, but is that by taking the lion's share of the risk, you're not necessarily taking the lion's share of the financial load. Let me say that in human language, okay? But let's start just by giving some evidence to what I said. So you already know, right? You can all sing the song that Israel invests in R&D more than any other nation worldwide as a percentage of its GDP. However, what I didn't say is that the government's share in that investment is the lowest of all OECD countries. It's really, really low. Okay? And yet I say we're taking all the risk and so on. But that's actually quite understandable because, again, simple example, but we're in an early stage facility here. So our incubators program, which I won't go
maybe in the Q&A we can talk more about. To put it in short terms, we give 85% of the funding for the companies while in the incubator. The first 2 to 3 years of life of the company, 85% comes from my office. Non-diluted, all the upside share that stays with the investors, incubator shareholders, and the entrepreneurs. Very generous, right? $5 from me against $1 from you. Really, really generous. However, and this is 25 years of data, thousands of companies, okay? What you find out is that over their life cycle, the same companies raised $5 of private funding against each dollar of government funding. So it's exactly the opposite. And it's not surprising because, as you all know, you need the big money when the company scales in the later stages. But that's when people are happy to invest. The venture capital firms, the strategic investors, even the banks sometimes. So, it's not as if we don't support them, but we kind of fade out there. So we took a lot of risk, and without our involvement, there wouldn't be in the pipeline for the later investors to invest in. But on the overall scheme of things, we only put $1 against $5 of the private sector. Okay, risk, remember that. And the sharing means that we never give 100% of a grant. There's always matching money in each and every one of our programs, and incubators is really on the generous side. Okay, typically, private sector matching will be on each grant we give. We work together to achieve our goals. Now, the model in Israel is very, very concentrated. The Office of the Chief Scientist is in charge both of R&D funding and innovation policy as such. Part of the R&D funding, thousands of companies every year approach us. We cover all the sectors of technology, everything you can think about: communication, life science, energy, food, plastics, agriculture, internet, everything else I forgot to mention as well. And all stages, from a single entrepreneur still working at the large company or the university but thinking about his or her new idea, to the largest company, largest multinational company or Israeli company, and all types of R&D are included there. So really quite a diversified portfolios as such. This is probably, the second thing you need to remember from the presentation, because I really believe, and say so at any stage or virtual stage I stand on, that the most important word in the world of innovation is collaboration. And, it used to take me longer to explain what I mean. In 2015, I don't think I have to. There's no other way to innovate rather than through collaboration. You can like it or not, that's the only way to do. And if you think you're going to succeed by having all the assets and capabilities inside the walls of your whatever, firm, university, country, forget about it. You're going to be successful through creating abilities to collaborate and work with innovators and other supporters which are, by definition, outside the walls of your organization. Now, within our office and in Israel in general, this has been a driving principle from the beginning. And a lot of what we do in the Office of the Chief Scientist is around matchmaking, creating that collaboration, creating interconnectivity between the different players in the ecosystem. That's a key issue. The more you have information flowing, the more you bring smart, relevant people in the room together, the better outcomes will come. That's a very important role. And of course, industry and academia, which I can talk about in the Q&A if of interest, key issue and key role of the government in my mind. And of course, collaboration goes well beyond Israel in terms of what we do. So we have 60 bilateral agreements with countries worldwide. Forget the agreements. Through those agreements, we matchmake and fund hundreds of joint R&D projects every year between Israeli companies and foreign companies, really worldwide. It's pretty much every country you could think about. Now, this is just to say it's working. It's not just economic theory, and we've been fortunate enough to have empiric data showing that what we do actually makes a difference. So you're all innovators and entrepreneurs. Imagine you could have invented a machine where you put $1 on the input side and you get $5, sometimes $10 on the other side. Everybody's smiling. Everybody's happy. So we actually have that machine. That machine is called the Office of the Chief Scientist. And this is not economic theory. Again, this is real data, not done by us, and revalidated again and again. This really helps us, by the way. It's not that we don't need to fight for our budget. Trust me, it's a bloody fight every year because obviously there are a lot of other things which are important, like healthcare, education, defense, and so on. But everybody acknowledges this is good money, okay, including Treasury. We don't need to explain why investing in R&D and innovation is a good investment and the impact it had on the Israeli economy. And this is very important, by the way, because If you notice my name, my title, I mean, and the ministry in which I work, it tells you the whole story. I'm called the chief scientist, but I'm part of the Ministry of Economy. And this is how we think about life. Okay, my job is to translate technological innovation to economic impact. And even though all I do all day long is science, technology, and innovation, if you read, for example, the legislation under which the office works, it's only economic language: jobs, growth, productivity, exports, value add. Okay, these are sort of the drivers we're looking for. Now, we understand that sometimes to do that, you need to go way upstream into the academic research and so on. But it's always with a very clear driver of creating that economic impact and value add on the Israeli economy. Okay, I'm going to go very quickly on that because I think you understand that cooperation is important. I will just say maybe here, just again as a wake-up call on the other side, it's really, really tough to collaborate. Okay? It's really, really complex. For anyone in the crowd who managed an R&D project in one company but two separate teams, that's tough. Now think about a company from Israel and a company from Shanghai. This is R&D collaboration, okay? This is not a marketing agent. They need to work together. Really, really tough, okay? But you don't have any choice. So, you better shape up for it because this is what you need to do. Collaborate globally. Now, this is just to say, I know we're in Australia, but certainly in recent years, I think the Israeli ecosystem, which traditionally have been working or looking mostly westbound to the US and Europe, is discovering Asia. In a growing fashion, Asia is discovering Israel. So there are more and more interactions, not enough to my taste, but still, if you look on the trend, it's amazing in terms of the number of interaction with countries like China and Korea and India and Japan, Taiwan and Singapore, and Australia as such, which is a reflection of what has been happening here this week, and I think more importantly, what will be happening in the next few months. So I think, the more we work together, and when I say work together, this is also important. Don't think about two companies working together to serve their respective markets. Okay? These are two companies working together to serve the global markets. This is how it should be looked upon. And by the way, every Israeli company, from the beginning, is thinking global. Reason being very simple, we don't have a local market. So in general, by the way, most of the good things that happen in Israel started from something which is not necessarily good. So no natural resources, no local market, no external defense threat and so on. Not good things. But results was quite good. And again, I can talk about it in Q&A. Okay, really, really quickly on that, just sharing with you the next 20 years, because I mostly talked about what we've done in the last 20 years. So we want to move basically from being the startup nation to scale-up nation, which would mean that while we want to maintain our position as one of the world's leading innovation hub, we're doing a lot to pull up the rest of the economy to the game of high productivity and technological innovation, methodological R&D, and so on. Because if you remember the 50% of the export, there was also on this side 10% of the workforce. So only 10% of the workforce worked at this high-tech. And we would like to bring high-tech also to other industries, to traditional industries like food and plastics and steel and textile, to the services sector, which certainly needs a lot of innovation into it, to the government itself. We want to bring new sectors into the game because in Israel we have, let me say the following. If I would have had the double of number of engineers, they'll be fully employed. Okay, so we need more talent. Now, in the early 90s, I don't know how you know about that, but a little history lesson. Israel faced a catastrophe. We were 5 million people at the time. We're only 8 now, by the way. I know we make noises if we were 800 million, but only 8 million. But at the time, we were 5 million, and we needed to absorb an immigration of 1 million people coming from the former Soviet Union, Russia. Huge challenge if you think about it. I mean, do the comparables in Australia. Of course, that catastrophe turned out to be a great miracle because we got an infusion of highly skilled worker. Yes, the assimilation part needed to be handled, and the incubators, by the way, played a role there as well. But it was really an amazing infusion of know-how and highly educated people. Now, this morning, actually, I think, right, we were speaking to President Putin in Russia. He's not going to send 1 million more. So we need to think of another solution because we need the people. Luckily, we have those people. We have them in Israel. We have them in sectors which are underrepresented in the high-tech game. And it starts with things which are, for me, infuriating, like, for example, women. Okay, I'm glad to see a nice number of female in the crowd, but not enough. So definitely we cannot give up 50% of our population, and we shouldn't. It starts with that, but it goes on to sectors like the Arab minority, the ultra-Orthodox religious Jews, and so on. So we're doing actually proactive things to bring them into the game, because not everybody needs to be, I don't know the Canberra comparables, I guess University of Canberra EE graduate, okay? You can be a part of this industry through other trainings, certainly in the world of computer science and so on. So we're doing proactive things to bring more people into the game and really expand the reach of what we do, along with keeping some of our traditional missions as such. Going to skip this. One other thing that I'm just sharing with you that is really exciting is going to happen really is changing our structure to meet our new mission. So actually, coincidentally, but starting next year, the office will be transforming to a new national authority for technological innovation. To make it short, what we want to do basically is keep the same things we've been doing, in my mind, quite effectively, and the same pillars of our policy, but be more flexible, be more dynamic. Because I think, when I joined the government, I tried, before I joined, because I thought it makes sense, being a customer of the chief scientist for 20 years, to write down what would I want from government, or what did I expect. And by the way, Israelis will gladly share with you in general what's not working, what you should be doing. But it's a great thing. Honestly, it is a great thing. And the two things that I thought about in terms of attribute, one is stability, long-term policy, because whoever you are, an entrepreneur or a multinational company, you take 5, 7, 10, 20 years decisions. You don't want the government to change their priority and policies every 2 years. You can't work that way. You need stability. You need long-term transparency of the policy. But the other thing I wanted, of course, is dynamism, because the pace of change is accelerating in everything you do. No need to explain to you that. And if it takes the government 2 years to design and execute a program, then many times the problem has moved somewhere else, or my company is long dead. You have to be more nimble. You have to be more agile. You have to be experimental. You have to be able to launch a program like we do with products, right? Figure out it's the wrong one and modify it, or God forbid, shut it down. These are things which are very hard for government. Don't underestimate really the challenge in doing this in a bureaucratic environment which wasn't designed for that. Again, it's not because they're not doing their job. It was not designed for these small setups. It's something else. And this is why we want to create something a little bit different, which will involve industry in a more efficient way. So very excited about this, and we'll see how it comes along. Ending up with this message, which I think in many aspects represents the Israeli way of thinking about life. And I think, I think I haven't insulted most of the crowd in my presentation so far, so I'll start going sector by sector. In this case, I will just say that ideas are overrated in my mind. Probably in this room, there are 20 people with the same idea, but how many of you will actually go out there and do something about it? And I think, of course, inventions are key. I'm not underestimating inventions. They're very important. But innovation, in my mind, is more important. And the act of entrepreneurship is the one that should be encouraged and celebrated and embraced, even in the case of failure. And I think that's the message which in Israel, there's no need to explain about it. Because I think what we need is more people to go out there and happen to think. Thank you very much. And now questions.
Yeah, questions.
Are you the moderator?
I'll moderate, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What's your Twitter hashtag? Have you got one?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Didn't you notice I'm not a social person?
I'm sure you have people around you.
Please.
Just ask a quick one about the technology incubator program.
Sure.
So in the biotech life science incubator that you set up, I noticed that speaking to that issue of international collaboration, you've got JJ,
Thank
you've got
you.
Takeda, etc. And then the government puts in 80%, if I'm just right here, that kind of a grant, effectively, to those companies. How is the IP managed with those international collaborators who are part of the incubator startup?
Okay, so there are different parts in your question. I'll try to cover them all. I'll start by saying the incubator program is 25 years old. What I'm describing now is actually the fourth generation of the program. So the program went through three major transformations in its life cycle, mostly keeping the same mission and a lot of the same basic principles, but adjusting to the changing environment. Okay, so what I'm describing now is actually the result of a reform that we put in place a few years back. I also say that when we talk about incubators, there are about 20 chief scientist incubators, but there are many other incubators which have nothing to do with us in Israel. Incubators, accelerators, all other types of. Having said that, the 20 chief scientist incubators are actually not owned by government. They're private companies for profit. I don't fund them at all. I don't fund the teams. I don't fund the real estate. I don't do any of that. The only thing I do, which is kind of nice, as I've said, 85% of the money needed by the companies, and if you want the sense of the money, it's $500,000 to $2 million. Okay, 85% of that comes from me, non-dilutive, as I said. Now, we go out with tenders, basically, in which you can apply for a license or a franchise to operate an incubator. You'll get that for 8 years, okay? And typically what happened, you gave one example, I'll give some more, is that we face syndicates of players that go out there and join forces to compete on a tender. The tenders are not sector specific, so we don't say, we want a medical devices incubator. And actually we get a very diversified sector span in each and every one of the tenders, which are highly competitive. Now, if you want to know a few of the people which are operating them, so you mentioned one of them, so this specific incubator is owned by 3 players. OrbiMed, which is the largest healthcare investor worldwide, also having dedicated Israel venture capital firms. Takeda and Johnson & Johnson, 2 large pharmaceutical companies. This structure by itself, keeps everybody honest, because it's not one company as you see, it's more than one, and there's also a financial investor as such. And the people working at those incubators, they're not J&J, they don't have a J&J badge. Okay, this is a company which has shareholders of strategic nature. Other incubators, again, there are other multinational companies who've done that, companies like Philips and Teva and Nielsen and Hutchison, very diversified, as I've said. And also venture capital firms, many times, are the owners of those incubators, and sometimes universities as well. Another example, again, just showing this, digital health incubator in Haifa, owned by IBM and Medtronic, so 2 large multinational companies. And then Pitango, which is one of Israel's largest venture capital firms, and Rambam, which is one of Israel's leading medical hospitals, doing both research. So I think once you have that structure, you get a few things, at least in our theory. Okay, one, you get the best people to do the job, as I've said, because a lot of is based on the fact that, as I've said, this is a very low touch program in terms of what we do. The main thing we do, I said, we need to choose correctly the winners of the tenders. If we chose it correctly, they'll take it from there, because these people, they know how to select the companies, to deal source, to select, to help them, to mentor them, to do the follow-on financing many times. So you kind of also get that as part of the model that we have, and it actually works very nicely in that respect. So we've seen great response from the ecosystem players to this model. As I've said, highly competitive tenders. And this is probably the structure that is done. Now, the IP part is not just about the incubators. It's actually joined by almost all of our programs. The intellectual property created through our funding has to be owned by the grantee, meaning the company, typically. Okay, but sometimes it's the university. And there's certain limitation on transferring that intellectual properties outside of Israel. Okay, I'm not talking about selling.
The grant, is it? Condition of the grant is that IP remains within Israel? Yeah,
but again, I said certain limitations, okay, which means that if you want to transfer the ownership of the IP, I'm not talking about selling your product or doing an OEM agreement, okay, I'm talking about transferring the ownership of the IP to a player which is outside of Israel. You need to come for our approval, and there's certain repayment associated with that. Yeah. And we have twice a week such a transaction, so it's not something which is But basically, that's the main issue about the IP.
But sorry, just to qualify, so the players that win the bid, that
Yeah.
are the corporate entities, in this case, two pharmaceutical companies and a venture an investor, let's say, do they own right of license here on any IP?
No.
Right. So for them,
No, we don't allow that. We don't allow any special rights for them in the companies as part of their investment agreement. Now, they can get in touch with the company later and create, and of course that's actually a good thing for the company. I have to change metaphor. I know it's not a good one, so excuse my not politically correctness, but truly these companies, they're like babies on steroids. Okay, you get 2-year-olds which look like 5-year-olds. Why? Because they've been meeting on a quarterly basis, senior management from J&J. They had access to labs, to licenses, to regulation schemes. The companies are stronger, actually. And I think we've managed to establish, truthfully, with the companies, the notion that this is not an off-balance sheet R&D. This is not a future spin-in. It should be part of your sometimes corporate venture, sometimes incubating strategy. That's okay. And if it's not, we have other programs for you to engage in. Don't use this one, okay? So the incubator, you must come with the right mindset. And I think it's proven itself quite effectively.
Thank you.
At the back, Glenn.
Hi there, I'm Glenn from the local government here, ACT government, and I run a risk sharing program, the Innovation Connect program, which invests in very early stage commercialisation. And I like what you were saying about how the failures often turn into successes through learning from those failures and moving on to other businesses. But from running a government program, I'm interested in how you capture that information, other than just watching over time and being able to relate back
Sure.
to the market and to government. So that's one sort of question.
Okay.
The other one is, I didn't see in your presentation anything about government procurement policy and how Israeli government procurement policy fosters innovation and supports local SMEs.
Okay. So 2 questions. Let me start with the first one. We have quite a unique data set, which is actually a result of a unique model, which is the royalties model. And again, in most of our grants, not all of them, but most of our grants have a scheme where if the project fails in the sense of, not necessarily technologically, it could be great technologically, but fails to generate revenues, then it's a grant, you don't owe us anything, part of the game, that's okay. But if you generate revenues out of the technology funded through our grant, royalties are being paid back to the Office of the Chief Scientist, about 3.5% of the relevant royalty stream, of course. We don't have the entire revenue base, and only until you repay the grant. So it's not perpetual. Okay, no upside. So you need to generate a lot of revenues, basically, to repay the grant. But the side effect of that, not that this is the reason, is that twice a year we get full reporting from all the companies about employees, revenues, kind of a lot of data set about what's been happening with the companies we supported. And we have a strategy and economic research unit which does a lot of analysis, if you like, on that, in addition to other ways of serving the market and comparing also that. But I think it's not just about what we do. There are really, I could give so many examples of Israeli companies. Let me choose 2. At least one of, maybe you know both. One for sure you'll know. One is Better Place, which tried to which had a vision of creating a nationwide network of EVs. And by the way, there was no chief scientist money in that specific company, but coincidentally, not that it says anything. Not success, shall we say? But I can identify for you about 40 different startups which have Better Place team, IP, know-how. By the way, sometimes areas totally different than EV. Nothing to do with that, because the smart grid management and even just control, we see them within the research centers of companies like General Motors and so on. So great contribution, really, great contribution about that. The other one is Modu. I don't know if you heard about that. Very seasoned entrepreneur, one of Israel's best, actually the creator of the USB memory stick. Sold his first company and systems to SanDisk for $1.5 billion. Very good guy, of course. Started another company with a great vision. Again, raised a lot of money and failed. 35 different startups came out of that company. And the examples go on and on. So I think it's something that is well established. Government procurement, I didn't mention it because I honestly and brutally think we're not good in that. Now, it comes from both sides, okay? It starts with the fact, as I've said, that Israelis don't look in general at the Israeli market as an interesting market, not even as beta at best, but you start building your company by talking to customers, in U.S., Europe, and in a growing fashion, Asia. So that's that direction. And the other direction is just that we're not there yet. So actually, we have a rather new initiative we call Digital Israel. Part of that vision is to upgrade government services and infrastructure, and through that process, which is something we actually put as a condition to that program within the office, was to adjust the procurement processes of the government so that not only Microsoft and IBM will be able to survive through it. And we actually did that, but it's very early stages, so I wouldn't want to talk about that. I think there are other countries which have done this part better than us.
Francis.
In this CBR Innovation Network here, all of the academic and research institutions, all the major ones in Canberra, are all founding members. And that's fantastic, and it's probably a good start. But what I'm wondering if you would like to comment on is, what are the key things you believe drive collaboration between academia, research, and industry, be it large or small? It's probably different for large or small industries, but I'd like your comment on that.
Okay, so
on that collaboration.
It's a wide subject. I'll try to say a few things about it. Let me start by saying that I think it's one of the most important subjects in an innovation ecosystem. It's becoming more and more important, and it's important for both sides of the game. It's important to industry because not only in science-based industry like biotech, which always understood the importance of working with academia, even the worlds of communication, information technology are getting to the places where the problems are tough and the challenges are such that you need research-intensive solutions. So you need academia. That's from the industry side. But I would claim also that academia needs industry. Not only for the reasons I'll talk about in a minute, but for the basic curiosity-driven research. We've learned from experience that interaction of the researchers with industry provides new questions, new paradigms, and new ways of researching that you wouldn't have get without that infusion of. So I said it's important, and it's becoming more and more important. And I would say that government needs to play an active role there, simply because industry and academia are not working well together, not because someone is not doing their job. It's because everybody is doing their job. That's why it becomes so typical. And for the young researcher interested in publishing and getting the tenure, it has very different mindset than the CEO of a young startup company, which is probably going to be dead 6 months from now. And honestly, it doesn't have the time, it doesn't have the patience, it has different challenges. So it doesn't mix. Okay, so you need to make it. You need to bring it together. In Israel, I think we've been fortunate, and obviously we try to contribute that with a few things. First of all, we don't have the issue which exists in several countries. I'm not sure it's the case in Australia, where you sort of need to choose whether you're a serious scientist or you're involved with companies. Some of our best basic scientists, Nobel laureates, president of the National Academy of Science, have been hugely successful on the company side, and they really serve as role models for the future generations. So this is very important, actually. They send that message across that you can do both. You can do the most basic research without any application in mind, and yet once you're there, think about how can that be put in the hands of companies, consumers, people worldwide to impact. And I think that mindset is very well rooted in the university. The second very important component is the technology transfer offices, which are very active and successful in Israel, and actually moved a long way in the last decade. So they are my allies. If you ask me they're my allies within the university, because we're fully aligned in our missions. Their mission in life is exactly like mine. And actually, even in some of the programs where we support applied research, they give the matching funds to the Office of the Chief Scientist Fund. But in general, we work together really to make it happen. So it's okay that you publish an article, but first issue the patent. This is a simplistic example, but sometimes even that part needs to be managed. So TTOs have played a big role in Israel. quite successfully. We still need. By the way, again, please don't get me wrong. I always tell the story. When I joined the government, I thought we were so bad in this because I had personal experience, both as an entrepreneur and as a venture capitalist in working with the university. It was like pulling teeth. It was awful. And then I found out we're really good at it. Truthfully, compared to other places. No, but on global benchmarks, really. So it's not good enough. But I think it's getting better. I think the more you bring people together, that's key. And I will say another thing, and please don't take it as I said I'll insult everybody, right? I promise that. I think academia is one of the most sophisticated organisms in adjusting itself according to the incentives presented to it.
Yeah.
We just put relevant programs in place, not damaging the basic research. This is in addition. I'm not saying, okay, I'm taking away out of that. No. That part is there, but just know there are also applied research programs, industry academia collaborations. I'm also managing the Horizon 2020, the European Frame Program in Israel, which is big money. So we try to drive the academia mostly through that. In very, very few cases that we've actually put metrics of industry interaction as a measurement for funding. In the nanotechnology, for example, program, we've done that, but that's a rare exception.
We've run out of time, I'm sorry, folks. Avi has to be somewhere else at 11, so would you please join me in thanking Avi for an enthralling presentation?